So, welcome back. Today, we are having critical conversation that challenges the very foundation of how healthcare interacts with significant part of the population, neurodivergent individuals. For too long, traditional medical model has viewed those people or like people with those conditions as they have a deficit or exclude them from being normal and not being different and focus on their strengths. So, we are here today to discuss a necessary and revolutionary paradigm shift moving to neurodiversity affirming strengths based model. This shift reframes neurological differences as a natural variance, let's say, in human cognition. So, this reframing has two powerful applications. One of them is it empowers physicians to treat neurodivergent patients by customizing care to each one of them to reclaim their identity. And also, it allows neurodivergent healthcare professionals, including those with ADHD, autism, and more, to stop masking their cognitive strengths and even use their unique wiring as a clinical advantage in their work. I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Brian Plant. He's a leading voice in this movement, advocating for a holistic and truly inclusive approach to medicine. Welcome and thank you for joining us to tackle this subject. And I'm really happy and grateful you had this time for us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to dive into this with you.
So let's begin by addressing the mind shift necessary for every healthcare professional. Dr. Plant, let's start with fundamental shift. So, what is the neurodiversity affirming model in patient care, and why most physicians move away from a traditional deficit only framework when treating neurodivergent patients?
So, when we think about neurodiversity and what does that mean, think of it as being similar to biodiversity. When we look at the health of an ecosystem, there are a variety of differences in biological function that exist and live together in synergy in order to keep that ecosystem healthy. There's resilience in that diversity. We also
Hmm.
see that in the gut microbiome, where if there's diversity, the number of different species and amounts of different species, that microbiome is more resilient to outside stressors. And so with neurodiversity, the idea is that there are varieties of brain wiring patterns that exist across a population. And some of those are spectral, meaning there can be differences in degree. And then others are more neurodistinct or neurotypes that are characterized by different ways of processing information, different ways of communicating, different ways of regulating one's nervous system, aka processing stress and coming back to a safe state. And when we create a culture and environment that allows those nervous systems to function in a healthy, organized way, that's better for everybody. That's healthier for the culture, that's healthier for our society. I would even argue it's healthier for our planet. And the question becomes, how do we create environments in healthcare, both literal environments for delivery of care and a mindset for patients and their providers that allow people to start to really understand their brains types, how to
Yeah.
work with it rather than against it, and how to create a lifestyle that is more aligned with their innate wholeness.
That's a great perspective. Another thing that comes to my mind when a doctor delivers a new diagnosis, like for example autism or ADHD, how can they shift like the conversation from disclosure of disorder to an affirmation of difference? Can you offer a specific example of language that they could use to empower the patients?
The most common metaphor that I use is your brain is operating like a Mac, and we live in a culture of PCs.
Okay.
Of course, there's a lot of nuance to that, but I frame it as this does not mean that you're broken. This tells us how your brain is operating, what its baseline system is for processing information cognitively, emotionally, socially, and sensory wise. We have quite a bit of neuroscience research showing differences in neural network connectivity, as well as nerve cell physiology and development. And so I say there may be medical conditions or medical imbalances that are going alongside this that are making your Mac overheat. And we can diagnose and treat and support those, but we're not fundamentally trying to change your operating system. We're trying to create the conditions that will allow that operating system to shine, because there are unique challenges. Or unique, that is also true. There are unique giftings, and those unique giftings come with unique challenges that need to be supported and understood.
So I get like I get sometimes in my podcast to tangent from my questions. So when you talk, sometimes like there are ideas that comes to my mind, and what came to my mind that I think we should start with teaching kids at schools the difference variation of minds, because that's where it start. Like the kid is little and he's different, let's say, and he gets bullied because he's different. So I think we have to integrate that awareness to our kids in schools, so when the new generation grow, they don't see him as different.
Yeah, I completely agree. There have been some children's books, I don't know the titles off the top of my head, but some newer children's books that represent this in storytelling format in a way that is accessible and understandable for children. But I completely agree. Some of when I talk to other neurodivergent folks, and I myself am neurodivergent, many of us, our core social traumas were from our peers, not from our parents or teachers necessarily, although there certainly can be that. School can be a very difficult place for an under-supported, undiagnosed neurodivergent individual.
That I see it until now. I see it everywhere, to be honest. So beyond the language of like how do you disclose to the patients, how must physical clinical environment and the pace of appointment change to reduce sensory overload and accommodate different communication needs in neurodivergent patients?
I love this question. The reality is it depends so much on each individual person. So having a certain aspects of one's, like the clinician's office environment, adaptable or changeable, and keeping in mind that many people with ADHD, many people that are on the autism spectrum do have a tendency towards sensory overwhelm. For example, my office, I tend to keep dimmer. I use incandescent bulbs. I have they're broad spectrum. They're for me as much as they are for my patients. But I do often ask folks when they come in, like, how's the lighting? Does this work for you? Hey, if you need to take a break, if I see somebody, a neurodivergent patient who's moving around a lot or stimming or looks anxious to me, I may ask, hey, if we need to take a break at any point, just let me know. We can do that. I'd like to get more toys in my office to have, not just for kids, but for adults as well. But creating an environment where there is openness of communication around changing are based on needs that may arise. Now, it can often be challenging for neurodivergent folks to be able to identify and name what they need in the moment, especially if they've been socialized to mask or suppress those needs. So that's something I think clinicians should keep in mind. Of just because I'm asking them what they need doesn't mean they're necessarily going to voice it. They may feel a lot of anxiety around that and may not even be aware of that. And so there is a little bit of anticipation on the provider of, okay, these are some things that will create a more hospitable environment. In terms of pacing, this is something I'm always working on because I can talk fast and connect ideas in a nonlinear way. But I try to frequently pause and say, how is this landing for you? Does this make sense? If I'm going over labs with someone and there's some abnormals that indicate some disease process, I'll check in and say, how is it for you as you're hearing me say this? What's happening? And I can get a lot of information relationally from how they answer or don't answer that question. And so I think there's a variety of things. I do often do video calls as well. So I offer to record if somebody wants that. But I think with technology, with the relational, like checking in piece, and with creating a more sensory friendly environment, those are some ways that we can give the impression that there's more of a welcoming of different brain types. and different
So
ways of
you
experiencing.
mentioned going through labs. Did you notice like common lab result that is very common with a certain neurodivergent cases?
Yeah, there are some key patterns, and I do talk to patients about this frequently. Of just because we're affirming someone's neurotype doesn't mean that we're ignoring that there can still be imbalance in our
Mm,
physiology that needs to be supported. And conversely, we may see an amplification of distress symptoms in neurodivergent individuals when their physiology is out of balance. And vice versa, we will see a lot more resilience to trauma, a lot more ability to metabolize sensory and social experience, not to erase neurodivergent traits, but to make them I call it rounding off the edges a little bit. And so I
okay.
talk to people like, look, we're not trying to fix you and who you are. We're trying to support your body so that you can function at your best. And with that in mind, I tend to see quite a few abnormalities or patterns of abnormalities where we will often see nutritional deficiencies. Vitamin D deficiency is common. This could be amplified by depression, or if there's sensory issues with being able to be outside in the sunlight. Um, Hormone
Most of
imbalance.
us has vitamin D deficiency, aren't we?
It's very
Yeah,
common, yeah, especially for folks with darker skin tones living in where their ancestors are not from, where there's a lot less
yeah,
sunlight. I grew up in Minnesota. I probably had abysmally low vitamin D. Now I live in Southern California, so it's a little better. Many people could do better with supplementing that, but that's a whole nother
yeah.
conversation. But nutritional deficiencies, metabolic imbalances like blood sugar dysregulation,
Mm,
insulin resistance, diabetes or prediabetes. This would be more of specialty functional medicine workup,
mm,
gut microbiome imbalances, issues with detoxification, and there are some
mm,
that influence that. So, mold, chemical toxins, heavy metals may be more impactful in those neurotypes. Chronic infection and immune dysregulation is very common as well. So, that could be the whole spectrum of Lyme disease and co infections to
yeah.
mast cell and histamine issues as well. So, we may not cover all that in one visit, but those are the things in the back of my head of these are some very common comorbidities that if we evaluate and support them, you're likely going to feel a lot better and
Mm.
be able to access and embody more of your wholeness.
Okay. Okay. Another thing is a major pitfall is diagnostic overshadowing. I mean, attributing all new symptoms to the neurodivergence. So, how can doctors ensure they are providing thorough, non biased care when a neurodivergent patient present with a new physical complaint?
My bias with this is as a naturopathic physician that
Mm,
is built into our training. So I'm often talking to patients about what I just said, which is yes, this is your neurotype. These are some medical comorbidities that are associated with that, but I'm still looking at the whole
mm,
picture here. And I want to include as many other doctors in that conversation as possible of it's not either or. Our brain it's not either or, and our brain is the primary sensor, perceiver, and regulator of our physiology,
mm.
not just as a king or queen on the throne top down, but as like the cornerstone by which all this stuff is being mediated.
Yeah.
And so if the brain is and nervous system are locked in a fight, flight, freeze, or other dysregulated state, physiology is going to be dysregulated. And so that I do tend to reflect to people that there is often an association between dysregulated nervous system states and dysregulated physiology. We can still support that dysregulated physiology, but you can have a regulated or safe nervous system state as a neurodivergent person or a dysregulated state as a neurodivergent person. And I think that's where creating environments and helping people really understand and accept themselves as they are can be because yeah, we can create what we want to do is promote, create, and sustain nervous system safety because we really important when it comes to regulating hormones, detox, immune function, digestion, and nutrient uptake. And at the same time, just because somebody is autistic or HD does not mean that they're in a nervous system dysregulated state and other things going on physiologically need to be supported. Um,
So some studies are saying, some researchers, some saying that ADHD can be caused from a screen or tablets in kids, or like the new cartoons that like that attention span of it is very little. So is that right, or do you think is it's not related?
It's such an interesting question because I think we're still, we as a medical community and as medical researchers are still trying to map the complex landscape of what affects brain development. Are there genetic neurotypes? I suspect I see this with families where it's like
Mm.
multiple generations have ADHD, including some before some of the newer technologies and other modern
Yeah.
insults to brain health or came on the scene. And so I do suspect that there is a proportion of the population that has the genetic neurotype. But absolutely, things like neonatal and early life trauma, early life antibiotic use, microplastic, nanoplastic, other environmental toxins, airway obstacles,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
technology likely contribute. And I don't have hard statistics on each of those, but likely we're seeing what we call in medicine synergistic effects rather than
Mm.
effects, where instead of plus one equals three, it's one plus one equals eight. Now each successive insult to brain physiology amplifies underlying traits. There's a way to still talk about this that doesn't shame somebody for their brain type. It's saying, okay, we want to treat all those variables that we can treat that are making the computer overheat.
Yes.
Again, our brains are more like ecosystems than computers, but for an analogy for patients, that tends to resonate, where they're not pathologizing their identity, but they're recognizing that, yeah, there are some things that we could really support physiologically that would help my executive function or my emotional regulation.
So, what is the physician's role in helping patient identify leveraging their unique cognitive health, like hyperfocus, pattern recognition, or deep empathy, as a foundational part of the treatment plan and life management? So, how do the physician do that?
I do. It's very important to me to communicate to patients that they're not broken. And I've
Mm.
mentioned this before, but that energetic orientation to them is like the foundation, because then I can go into talking about some of these other things that we're wanting to work on physiologically. But if there's this underlying foundation of they see me, they hear me,
Mm.
they understand me, and they're welcoming of me, then that stuff can be organized in a paradigm that is affirming and motivating and supportive. And so I think the doctor's role in this is to be a safe space that many neurodivergent patients have not had in their life. They may not have it at home. They certainly, unless they went to a special school, didn't have it at school, and often don't have it with other healthcare providers,
Mm.
unfortunately. And so if we can create that environment for patients, that relational environment, then everything else medically that needs to be addressed can be.
Great. When you were talking again, I was thinking of it's not just the physician's role, right? Because that ends after the patients leave. But how is like the society, the family, the teachers, the coworkers can support the lifetime treatment plan or management for this regular patient?
This is the truly complex and evolving question, the existential question, because for many of us, especially neurodivergent healthcare providers, we didn't get that support when we were growing up. And now we're trying to be that with and for patients, while also recognizing that we live in a culture that doesn't really support difference in brain process, difference in a variety of contexts, but particularly in this conversation, differences in brain processing. And the consequences of not living up to some of those expectations are very real. There can be relationships that people really need for financial livelihood, for academic reasons, that are threatened by us bringing those differences. And so the doctor cannot save the patient, it cannot change that system. What we can do is talk about this. What we
Yes.
can do is bring awareness to family, to patients, to families, to other healthcare providers, to communities, and to our culture at large that we're out here and we have some things to say, and we have a beautiful, unique gifts to offer that the world needs, not just from this capitalist, I'm going to contribute this to get value, but like from our core essence,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
brain. There's patterns, there's spiritual insight, there's relational empathy that is amplified in a lot of these neurodivergences. And there's that aspect. And then there is also the human aspect of grieving with, I'm sorry you didn't get what you needed. I'm sorry that you are living a lifestyle right now that requires you to function while masking. That's really intense and exhausting. And I'm with you in that. And let's figure it out. Let's take it one step at a time and navigate it together.
Yeah, the masking is a big issue because of the stigma, I think. Yeah. Now let's go and talk about neurodivergent clinician. Turn the lens a little bit to the provider. For physician or healthcare professional who newly diagnosed with ADHD, how do you advise them to reframe their own brain's operating system from a source of professional shame to genuine clinical asset?
So many of the traits that folks with the ADHD neurotype have, and I would even say autistic as well, are highly adaptive for getting through medical school. I was surprised to hear that 10 to 25% of medical students have been diagnosed with ADHD. Now, many don't disclose that to their academic institution, but those traits can be highly adaptive. Hyperfocus, the ability to thrive in often chaotic or
Mm.
uncertain, high pressure, urgent environments really locks in that interest driven and attention system and dopamine and executive function, things like that. For autistic folks who don't also have ADHD, complex pattern recognition. I think about specialties like pathology or some of the
Oh,
specialties where there might be
yes.
a little less direct interface with patients. So these traits can be highly adaptive for getting through training and also highly adaptive at being the physician that does the thing that other physicians can't do as well as you. And so I like to highlight that. This is both an illuminating diagnosis, a new lens to look through, and it's a little disorienting because then there's like a now what? What do I do
Yeah.
with this information? How do I want to adjust what I do? And that is different for every person, but encouraging being able to ask those questions as we come to understand ourselves more as providers and what our unique contribution to patient care can be.
So do you see patients as care health provider, like as they are, how do I say that? They are at peace with their neurodivergent like condition and they come and talk to you and they are fine with it, or do you have to affirm that this is like a unique gift and you have to convince them to see it from the other lens?
It's rare for healthcare providers to be at peace with this. It, I think there's a lot of reasons for that. These are theoretical, but I think for many of us, that especially physicians, we have a lot of internalized achiever energy from the language of internal family systems therapy. We have very well developed doer protector parts that get us through, and it can be very uncomfortable emotionally and somatically for us to slow down and be like, oh, there's this really overstimulated aspect of me, or there's this part of me that wants to quit medicine. There's this part of
Mm.
me that doesn't know how to take care of people when I don't feel taken care of. And a lot of the conversations I'm having with healthcare providers are about that. And I'm pretty honest about my own. Every one of those things I just named are also questions that I work through on a weekly basis. And I think there's still so much in medicine and healthcare that is growing and evolving and adapting to include this. But for those of us who are not in private practice and don't have the ability to totally control and create our optimal environment, it is difficult.
So, do you have any advice for neurodivergent clinician to decrease the overstimulation?
Yeah.
The
Yeah. So
setting is it? What advice do you have? What
Depends
tips,
on what
tools?
kind of practice environment. So, like, I'm in an outpatient integrative psychiatry practice where I have a lot of control of what's going on in my office in terms of the lighting, the sound. I'm hybrid, so I'm in person and I'm
Mm.
remote. So, today I'm from home and I have a lot more downtime to be able to, or I should say, during break time, I'm in my own environment. And
Yeah.
so, if you are a clinician and you're not in the hospital and you have the ability to adjust some of those aspects of your environment, it's not always obvious right away how big of a difference those things can make. And then you start doing it and you're like, oh, I feel a little.
Yeah, I noticed the noise, the high, like loud noises. It makes me nervous and overstimulated and irritable. And yeah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, let's say you're in an environment where you can't externally control that. I'm a big fan of the Loop earplugs. The brand is called Loop. They have a few different ones. Is it Engage? Engage is one that is intended to dampen the decibel count without tuning out voices. So you can still have
Oh,
a conversation. It's just like somebody turned the volume down. The ones I have are the Switch, which have three different modes. They're not electric, they're not Bluetooth. It's just a plastic thing
mm,
that you can put on your keychain. And I like the Switch because if I'm in an environment like a coffee shop and I need to tune things out,
mm.
I'll use the quiet mode. If I'm in the grocery store and they're waiting for someone to call out my sandwich order, but the music's loud, I'll use the experience mode. And if I'm having a conversation and I need to hear everything, then I'll use the engage mode. And so that's one
That's
little
a
thing. Yeah.
that's a great invention. I'm gonna use it with my kids.
Yeah, I
Like,
do have a tip
tune them
one.
out.
Yeah, no, they're great. And then for those who can safely do so, even just having noise canceling headphones over the
Mm.
ears during breaks. So I sleep with earplugs, and sometimes I like jump right into my day, not with patients, but like I'll be rearranging cleaning up my house, and I'll have them in, and I'll forget that I have them in, and I'm like, why do I feel so calm after an hour?
Oh,
Because I've been just tuning out like the fridge noise and like random background noise that I didn't think was creating sensory stress, but actually was building up. So even
yeah.
little things like that can be helpful.
That's a great idea. I'm gonna start doing that to see because after a few hours, just exhausting.
Totally.
It's a big part of it. The noise is a big part of it, I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the fast-paced, high-stress environment, let's say of the ER, or seems does it suit some of the ADHD patients? And can you explain how ADHD trait like crisis agility and the ability to hyperfocus can be used as an advantage in the ER situation?
It can absolutely be adaptable in those contexts. And often folks with that pattern outperform their peers because they're able to really hyper focus. And there are some different neural networks that are engaged with that. Like when the anterior cingulate cortex is engaged, we're able to really lock in. Now, that part of the brain is also our error detector. So in our everyday resting state, that could be anxiety provoking because it's noticing all these little things that could be different. But in that environment where we need precision and fastness and the ability to really lock in, when that part of the brain is overactivated, that could save somebody's life.
Wow.
There's also the novelty aspect. We often say that ADHD neurotype is attention system is organized around interest based attention, meaning dopaminergic networks engage when we're engaging something that is either new or interesting. The acronym is INCUP, so interest,
Okay.
novelty, competition, urgency, and pressure. Those are the things that innately motivate people with ADHD. In
I didn't know competition would excite them.
It can, and again, not necessarily for everybody. If someone has
Mm.
a lot of trauma, then that might put people more into a fight state. But for many, it's exciting, and it's in an environment like the ER. I mean, that there's novelty. You never know what's going to come in, and when it does, there's urgency. You have to respond now, and so these are going to be things that work with the current of that processing system. Whereas, an autistic person without ADHD would probably find that to be an intensely dysregulating environment.
So, do you see patients with part of the attention deficit and not having the hyperactive part of ADHD and vice versa?
Yeah, so the reality of autism and ADHD, and probably a lot of these other neurodivergent subtypes as well, is that it's not a linear spectrum of
Mm,
you have a little or you have a lot. It's really a three-dimensional multi-trait spectrum
mm,
of, some people are more have more inattention, and it really requires a lot of external structure, motivation, and things like that, co-regulation to engage that attention. And others may have that hyperactivity, and as long as they are able to exercise 2 or 3 times a day, then they feel more regulated, and everything in between.
mm.
Absolutely, I see probably more adults with the inattentive subtype, to use DSM criteria. But of course, there are limitations with that model, but diagnostically that. And at Amen clinics, we have 7 different subtypes of ADHD that we
Wow.
utilize. And that can be useful because not everybody has the hyperactive or the inattentive.
So, I'm undiagnosed, but I tend to, since I was a kid, if I love reading, but I take so long reading because if the paragraph is long, I would just get lost in the middle and I have to go up again to the beginning and read it again. My brain can't focus
Yeah. Yeah.
all the way down. And it's been hard, but I think I got adapted to it.
Yeah, that's interesting because that is something that I hear a lot, and some things that kind of come to mind are like, okay, some people are better at auditory processing than visual processing. That's me. I read every word because I have a very like hyper focused attention system.
Me too, yeah.
It takes forever, and when it's reading poetry, I love it because it's ooh, each
Yeah.
word is like a bite. But when it comes to trying to get through a textbook, like I do audiobooks because I can't. It took me a very long time to realize that I would go into fight or flight by trying to read. And I think it was because I was anxious all the time. And then when I started feeling less anxious all the time, I'm like sitting down to read. This is this relaxing. I'm going to read this fiction book and then find myself anxious 20 minutes later. I'm like, why is that? And I'm like, oh, because my brain is having a hard time processing this information. So I think that's a very common thing, even for highly intelligent people.
For me, audio, even audio gets me, I tune out.
Yeah,
So I would prefer reading because I get to go back and read w- versus like hearing something. It's like while I'm driving and I have to repeat that. And
correct.
so even though it's hard to read, I find it easier than hearing audiobooks. And my husband is like, why don't you hear audiobooks? And I'm like, I can't focus. I just can't. I don't know. I tried. Yeah.
Yeah. And some people, I hear this is a common ADHD experience. I don't think I could do it personally, but they'll listen to an audiobook while they're reading that book.
Oh,
They're getting the video and or the visual and the auditory information at the same time. And that can be helpful from what I've heard.
we can try everything.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I have nothing to lose. So many autistic healthcare professionals are undiagnosed because of the masking. Decades and decades of intense masking. So, what are the unique clinical strengths that autistic physicians bring to medicine, and such as like attention to details, deep systems thinking, and how can they move toward the authentic, less masked professional journey?
Yeah, it's an amazing question. So, in terms of, I guess where I want to start is a lot of undiagnosed autism. We're talking about undiagnosed.
Mm.
Yeah, undiagnosed autistic physicians and just undiagnosed adult autistic people in general don't know that they're autistic until they hit burnout. They were often, I've heard other neurodivergent voices and professionals say there's the gifted child pipeline where it's like you're a gifted child, but you don't get all the support needs met. And then you're a high achieving professional and then you hit burnout. And then you
Oh yeah.
realize that you're autistic and then start reevaluating everything. Okay, is this, how would I do this now that I know what I know about my nervous system, and not just the cognitive lens of this is how my nervous system works, but the actual embodied felt sense of these are things that really help me regulate. And these are some things that are not so good for me that I powered through in order to get to where I am today. And that is a journey. And that is a journey that is unique to every individual in terms of the timing, how long it takes, what kind of support do we have access to, how much does your life depend on you continuing to mask in order to survive and make ends meet. And that all, I think, colors the conversation of how do we understand strengths. Am I convinced myself that my neurotype is adaptable in this environment, but this environment is deeply unsupportive of my neurotype? Or am I understanding from a more bottom up way that, oh, wow, I'm incredibly gifted in this area. Wow, I can do something. And when patients hear this, they say, I've never heard anybody explain it like that before. And they're like, this is opening up a whole new understanding of my life. Or I just can't stop listening to you. Like when you talk about this is so insightful to me. Like those are strengths that I think doctors really need to take in and be like, wow, like I'm doing something that is unique here. And okay, my sensory burnout is like the other side of this. And so how do I support and manage that so I can continue to offer the best of what I have? Now, that's just one example. For another person, it might be they find that they're really good at diagnosing rare diseases because their ability to focus on the pattern and not miss the details. But in order to do that, they need to be in a solitary room with dim lighting, or they need hours at night to hyper focus without distraction. So I think step one would be getting a sense of from the inside out of what are my strengths? What does my brain do really well that even on a bad day, I can do well? And then what are the things in my environment or my healthcare provider lifestyle that could support and protect that? And allow me to really lean into that. And then what are the hard choices I have to make where I say no to certain things, or I have build up the courage to ask for what I need from my administrative team or my supervisors or HR. And then what am I going to do if that doesn't go so well?
So I have two questions. One of them is you said many physicians who are autistic, they don't know they are autistic until they hit burnout. So what are the signs when they hit burnout that can give you a hint they are autistic? And the other thing is, what would it take for organizations and hospitals to support neurodivergent physicians?
So autistic burnout is that is actually a term that is now being researched. It's still pretty early in but there's a little bit coming out on autistic burnout and what makes it different from depression, although it can look a lot like depression. And then what do we do to treat it, not like from a whole person perspective? And oftentimes sensory sensitivities are amplified in autistic burnout. Plus, I guess I'll speak to the autistic aspects of it. And then a lot of it is just like burnout. It's like low energy, lack of interest in things that you used to find pleasurable, you're feeling overwhelmed all the time, no matter how much rest you're getting. Those are and physical health declining and any variety of physical symptoms that could go alongside that. Those are pretty common symptoms of burnout across neurotypes. But specifically with autistic burnout, the sensory sensitivity tends to amplify. Ability to process social information maybe tends to decline even more. Autistic traits become a lot harder to mask. Like people are often described they couldn't mask if they wanted to. And that can be very dysregulating, especially if there's a lot of unprocessed trauma and pain in the autistic nervous system around what happened or didn't happen when they were unmasked before. And so if they don't have support and structures in their life that can allow them to unmask on a more gradual, sustainable basis, that sudden inability to mask can be a lot. Anxiety certainly goes along with all those symptoms I just mentioned, sensory, social, and the inability to mask as much. And then what do we do to support that? Rest is a big one. Even though it looks like depression, typical depression, you would want to encourage action and getting out and with life. Whereas autistic burnout, it's what are your special interests? And then how do we create structures that allow you, like easy structures that allow you to engage in your special interests? Because that's super regulating for autistic people. How do we reduce sensory input distressing sensory input and then bring in more pleasurable sensory input and figuring out what that is. And then lots and lots of rest. Safe relationships, that could be with humans, but for a lot of autistic people at this stage, that's more going to be with animals or with nature.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so going out into those environments in like low barrier to entry ways. Okay, you have no energy, but you can sit out on this bench for minutes outside on a sunny day, or listen to nature sounds on your headphones if you can't get to nature or you don't live in a place that's hospitable that time of year. So that's that. In terms of how do we advocate for ourselves and each other in a healthcare environment, I think this is where neurodivergent voices need to be included in leadership basis. So not just like a panel one time or only listen to autistic people when they're burned out and distressed and dysregulated because we have to legally because HR and laws and stuff like that. How instead we create an environment that understands that, like biodiversity, we need neurodiversity as an organization and as a culture in order to excel. Whether we're saying excel from a business standpoint, an administrative standpoint, or a patient care deliverables, there are more neurodivergent people now than ever. And our patients need us to understand them. And if we're burned out and traumatized and unsupported, we're going to perpetuate that onto our patients unknowingly because we haven't been able to get that supported in ourselves. So anyway, we could do a whole conversation just on that.
So, what's the difference? Like, how do I know, am I like depressed or this is an autistic burnout? Like, how can I know that?
It's not always easy to tell. For, let's say this is for a person who is autistic or they don't know. I think with depression, I would think that the special interests, this is theoretical, but the special interest engagement wouldn't have as much of a positive impact. Whereas in autistic burnout, oftentimes people are like, oh, I feel really like a lot of life energy. I feel a lot of excitement. I don't feel not happy. I'm only happy when I'm engaging in this thing. Of course, depression can present with nuance, but, or that it's, rest makes things better. Whereas I often see with depression, I want to sleep all day and it doesn't do anything. I don't feel any better. I don't feel motivated. Whereas an autistic burnout person may find that, oh, all I needed was like 3 days off or something. No, depends.
Well, that would be nice, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my experience. When I'm like, okay, I've been pushing too hard. I get off my phone. I spend time with people that are easy for my nervous system. And I engage in what I'm innately interested in that doesn't require effort. And then a few days later, I'm like, I'm back. We're good.
So you're energized.
Yeah, I think so. I'll just say this real quick if you don't mind. Then that's where functional medicine and naturopathic medicine can be really useful. Like they might need adrenal support. They might need nervous system tonics. They might need nutrition to help with neurotransmitter recycling. I think there's so many ways that we can help people recover from autistic burnout that don't make their underlying neurotype the problem for the burnout, the reason, at blame for the burnout. Yeah.
So the autism, it's a big spectrum.
Yeah.
But the misconception of it for the public and society and like people who are not, they don't have the whole knowledge about it. So can you tell us, because some people would say autism, they have this aggressive and full blown symptoms, but it's not true. Like it ranges from one side to another. So can you just explain what's the symptoms and the range? I know you can't simplify all of it, but just elaborate on that, please.
Totally. So we want to differentiate between autistic distress symptoms and like innate symptoms based on the nervous system and that wiring. Preference for connection with other people through shared special interests is a very common trait in autism, and that's not a distress symptom. Now, if someone is so focused on their special interest because of all this other anxiety and sensory overwhelm in their environment that pulling them away from their special interests for something that they actually need, let's say a meal or to sleep, is intensely dysregulating and there's a lot of aggression that manifests, that is a distress symptom. And so we're not trying to get rid of that special interest or those things. We're just trying to really, the way I describe it is we just want to promote safety in the nervous system.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
I think understanding some autistic traits can be helpful for that, like stimming, for example. Stimming is when a neurodivergent person, typically an autistic person, is engaging in repetitive movements or sounds.
Yeah.
And it's like looping. And there are certain forms of therapy that try to suppress that and try to train autistic children usually to not do that. And what we know is that is one of the most soothing ways for an overstimulated nervous system to discharge that tension. A slightly more socially acceptable version of that with ADHD is
Oh,
can't
okay.
stop like moving their leg, and it's okay, they're like, I always have to be moving, and it's okay, we don't want to suppress that. Now we know that certain environments there might be more stigma, or there might be a reason to say I'm going to have to channel this energy in a different way. But let's say someone has higher support needs and they're not able to identify that need. We don't want to suppress that. We want them to be able to get that tension. But we may also ask the deeper question of what's overstimulating them in the first place. If they're stimming a lot in this particular environment, is there something about this environment that is not supporting the safety that their nervous system needs? Just some things that come to mind.
So are all autistic patients have the repetitive symptom? Do they all exhibit that?
I don't think so. I think there's a lot of nuance in how that. So some other symptoms that we could say, there might be hyper or hypo awareness of information. There can be emotional, like deep emotional experience, which can sometimes be dysregulating, but can also be really immersive and mystical. There can be preference for logic, but not always. Processing speed of information may be slowed down or sped up. A preference for direct communication is one I see a lot, where autistic folks are like, just tell me, speak bluntly. They speak bluntly, and other people may say, neurotypicals may say, you're being rude. And it's like, no, I'm actually don't have any emotion of judgment. I'm just naming the observation. That was a big one for me growing up. I got in trouble frequently for just sharing observations.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
It didn't make sense to me. I was like, why are you upset about this? Is visibly obvious. And they're like, you can't say that though. And I'm like, what? Like,
I do still get in trouble with my husband. He's, you're rude. And I'm like, I didn't say anything. I'm just stating the facts. Like I'm naming things. And he gets used to it. So he knows now I don't mean I'm not offending anyone, but I'm very literal. That's,
yeah,
yeah.
literal, that is a very common trait. But like I said before, it's not a linear spectrum, it's a multi-trait. So some people I've met autistic people that were very hypo activated sensory wise. And that's for a while where I was like, there's no way I'm autistic. I'm too much of a feeler. I'm too expressive for that. I'm very self-aware. People in my life are like, you're not autistic. You're too self-aware. And I'm like, and then I got diagnosed and I'm like, this is a different flavor of it. But yeah, helping people map that for themselves, whether they need to do it literally and quantitatively or just to have a general sense of it, can be very helpful at
I think that the support system and people around you play a big role in you accepting yourself and your differences and your strengths.
Absolutely. One of the most transformative tools in my life. I don't even want to call it a tool. It's so much more than that, but this embodied relational practice of authentic relating, relational mindfulness practices I think those types of practices do tend to draw a lot of neurodivergent and highly sensitive people because it's a different way of communicating in a relational context where people are being more authentic and honest about their present moment experience. And that has allowed me to feel seen, heard, understood, and celebrated more than anything else, more than therapy, more than functional medicine. And I love all those other tools and
Yeah.
practices, but I think we're not meant to do this in isolation. We are beings.
So is that a workshop or?
Yeah, so this is something that I'm wanting to offer more in a professional context on and on as the next step of my professional journey. So we can definitely talk about that more. But currently, there's the Relateful Company does relatefulness, which is essentially a relational mindfulness practice, also known as circling. And so if you're in Europe and you're hearing this, Circling Europe is an organization that does that. There's also Authentic Relating Trainings International that does weekend workshops that are have different levels associated with them. And then if you live in a major city like Austin or LA or New York, there are groups that do these practices and meet on a regular basis. There are probably other cities as well. I'm not, I think Denver has an Authentic Relating group. But
Do you
yeah,
think Houston has one or no?
I don't know if Houston has one. I'll have to look into that.
So going back to the physicians and challenges, the common challenge for ADHD, let's say, is patients is executive dysfunction. For example, organization, planning. So what are the most effective external scaffolding techniques that or technology like workflow systems, let's say, can help ADHD physician to minimize these weaknesses?
So this idea that I'm going to share is, I did not come up with this idea, but I love it. I think that the guy who came up with his name is Kai. I'm sorry, I'm not remembering his last name, but he says people, particularly neurodivergent, but ADHD more specifically, we need structure, but we hate structure.
Yeah.
We need rhythm. Is really the middle way between structure and spontaneity. And rhythm is something like, okay, what are some of these things that I need to have in my day that are non-negotiable in order for me to feel like my nervous system is regulated and I'm able to achieve the goals of the day, whatever the things are that I need to get done. But either extreme, too much spontaneity. Okay, I get to be connected to myself and my authenticity, but I might not be able to direct that energy in a way that I need to. And then on the other end of that extreme, it's too much structure. I can't be myself. I feel bound by it, and now I feel like I have to mask to perform to get there. And a rhythm is this kind of it is a dance in the middle where it's okay. What are some things that I can plan into my day that still give me some choice? So let's say morning routine. Okay, I'm going to do a 15-minute plus or minus 2 minutes morning routine where 5 minutes of it is going to be some kind of calming, centering practice. 5 minutes of it is going to be some kind of engaging with wisdom text practice. 5 minutes of it are going to be some kind of movement practice. So that could look like, okay, what are my options for the first one? I could meditate. I could do some breathing. I could name my present moment experience as it's happening. Okay, what kind of wisdom text? If I'm a spiritual or religious person, I could read a scripture, or I could read a prayer, say a prayer, or read some poetry. And then movement, that could be anything. And if that feels like too much, then I say just pick one. And okay, I'm going to meditate for 5 minutes, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this. But for those who want more choice, I get bored super easily. I need that choice. So I'm like, okay, but there's still a rhythm to that. Or during my lunch, I'm going to get outside and get 5 minutes of sunlight. In terms of workflow, time blocking, we can do a whole talk on that. But there's different strategies there that work for different people. But the last one I want to say is body doubling. And I love this concept so much. This is doing a task with another person, whether they're doing that task with you or they're doing their own task. This is really helpful for people with executive dysfunction. There's just something about having another nervous system that is like either parallel play or like engaging in it with you that really just makes it easier. There are co-working spaces online where nobody has audio. They just are on video with everybody. And
I didn't know that exists.
yeah, where it's like 15, 20 people and they're working. And so you would join that if you're like, I got to get some work done. And I know I'm left to my own devices, I'm not going to do anything. So I'm going to get on this call but no one's interacting. We're all just working. Yeah.
That's nice. It's like a community.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. I remember when I first learned, this was a few years ago, my partner at the time was just sitting on the couch while I was vacuuming my apartment. And I was like, wow, I had no resistance to doing this. And she had ADHD and she was like, yeah, it's called body doubling. It's because I'm here. And I'm like, what? This is a thing. And I've explored it over the years and it's absolutely a thing. And I've talked to many others who have that experience.
That's it made me think I actually work less when I have people around me.
Interesting.
Yeah. Whenever the home is empty, I go,
Okay.
I finished the tasks. Yeah.
Distraction, you think?
I don't know. I don't like, I feel like I can't do my own things the way I want if
Uh,
someone else is there. And if they interfere, that means my system of doing things going to change.
yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, masking or hiding neurodivergent traits can lead to severe burnout. What steps can neurodivergent healthcare professionals take to advocate for the reasonable accommodations need? Example, a quiet space or for charting, varied task rotation, without fear of professional repercussions, let's say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't want to ignore the reality that there is a risk with
Mm.
this. There have
What's the risk? What do you mean there is a risk with it?
there's a risk that in a professional context that supervisors are not going to be supportive,
Yeah.
and or HR is going to do it, but it's going to affect your reputation. And so I don't want to ignore that. And what were you gonna say?
I was thinking of that's what makes me feel like the organization systems need to adjust to accommodate physicians with neurodivergent or like healthcare professionals in generals.
Absolutely. And I think a big part of shifting the conversation collectively is framing it as patients get better outcomes.
Yes.
And I don't know if there's data like yet to support. Actually, that there probably is on physician error, right? Data on burnout and long shifts and things like that. So we have data on that with neurodivergent doctors specifically. I'm going to go look for that and see if there is some. But patients get better quality care, and the therapeutic relationship, especially in more integrative medicine settings, like we know that's important. A lot of
Yeah.
larger clinic, like my clinic, is very supportive because we care deeply about the doctor patient relationship and the customer experience. And so the one adaptive way to have this conversation is to frame it from a business and deliverable standpoint, and to advocate for quality over quantity. And this has been an edge for me recently to be able to say, I have not had a patient complaint. These are the kinds of outcomes that I'm getting this about me
Mm.
at this clinic, and I need to work less. I'm seeing too many people. This is too much. And that was so scary for me, and still is scary for me to lean
Mhm.
into. But the body keeps the score. The body tells a
Yeah.
different story. It's, Brian, you're either going to listen to me or you're going to listen to me later, and it's
Yeah.
not going to go well. And
Too late.
I've done that loop. I don't need to do
Yeah.
that loop again. And so I think a big part of it for doctors is find out what your needs are. That's step one. Step two is figure out what some of the solutions might be in a work or business setting, and then advocate for those solutions and frame it as, this is what is going to allow me to do my best for our patients. And if you've already built up a reputation, you can leverage that and say, that I do good work, that I'm committed, and this is how I can do this in the long run. The hyper focused traits that got someone through medical school are not going to get somebody through 20 years of clinical practice. It's just not sustainable.
Yeah, unfortunately, many organizations care about the production more about like the health of the workers or like the patients or the clients or whatever we call it. So I think there should be a move to change everyone perspective about neurodivergent people to include them and to support them with the environment they need at work.
Absolutely. We need a
I
widespread.
feel like those people are assets and their differences is not a deficit, it's like a gift. So look from this perspective and get advantage of
Yeah.
hiring them. Yeah.
There's an adaptive, from a biological perspective, there's an evolutionary adaptive reason for these neurotypes. And
Yeah.
yes, we may be seeing more prevalence of autism because of some of the environmental
Yeah.
changes in our physiology and then how that has affected brain development. But when we look back, Trait sensitivity is like 1 in 5 people are highly sensitive people. ADHD as a neurotype, like these things were selected for in our evolutionary biology because they served a need in the community. Now, historically, these people may have been hunters or shamans or medicine men or women or intermediaries. These would be people that where their sensitivity was a vital need for the community. And we need to reclaim that as a species before it's too late. Because Western civilization without that is on a path of destruction, of self-destruction.
That's nice. I like we need to reclaim that before it's too late. So if you could give a single concrete piece of advice for medical school dean or residency program director, what would be the most important action they could take tomorrow to foster a neurodiversity affirming culture for both future clinician and patients they will serve?
Listen to neurodivergent students, professionals' voices, whether those are already practicing
Yeah.
professionals or those in school. Like that has to be included in curriculum development and redesign or on a consulting basis, but not as like a nod to diversity, equity, and inclusion, but actual, hey, we really need to do this differently in order to serve the needs of our society and our culture. And if we don't adapt at the academic institutional level, we are going to produce a generation of burnt out, traumatized clinicians that are going to perpetuate this burnout and trauma in our population, in the general population, in a way that is not going to help the health of our culture. And that sounds intense, but it really
Yeah.
is that intense.
But
And
it's the truth and reality.
yeah, exactly. And so if we're not having that conversation, then in the neurodiversity movement, a lot of you'll hear the phrase, nothing about us without us, meaning you don't know what we need. And I would say that generalizes to all humans about what a certain demographics. You don't know what that population needs unless you're asking them and figuring out together, how can we support you in this way? Um, and I think with those support needs being met, the limit is it doesn't exist. There's so much
Yeah.
possibility.
Yeah.
And I know that's what PTI is all about is
Oh, yeah, yeah. I love being a PTI member. I was talking to my friend yesterday and I'm like, I feel like I'm fulfilled because we're spotting, like, we have a spotlight on things that people don't talk about mostly. And it's, as we say, like, as the name of this podcast, the invisible reality. And there are things that people avoid to talk about, especially physicians. And I love having a spotlight on them to I'm a problem solver. I like to solve the problem, not to ignore it. Yeah, I feel fulfilled. Yeah, I'm blessed.
I love that. Yeah.
Dr. Plant, this has been for me personally incredibly insightful discussion. So it's clear that moving to a neurodiversity affirming model is not just being kinder. It's about practicing better, more effective medicine that honors the whole person. Whether we are talking about patient receiving diagnosis or a doctor managing their own neurodivergence, the core message is the same. Difference is not a defect. So the power is in the reframing, seeing patients' challenges as needs for better communication and providers' unique wiring as a true clinical advantage. I'm happy that we have this conversation, but I feel like we have so much to talk about in another podcast. Hopefully, thank you so much for your information. Thank you for your insightful knowledge.
Absolutely. So great to share it with you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. If someone wants to, from our listeners, wants to find you, can you share your website or your contact?
Yes. So currently I'm practicing exclusively through the Amen clinics. And you can find me on amenclinics.com, or if you just Google the Plante ND Amen Clinics, you'll see my bio, and there's contact information there for how to schedule. If you'd like to work with me, I'm trying to get better about posting on social media. You can find me at Dr. Brian Plante, all one word, no dots or
Mhm.
spaces or anything. And there will be more information there as I develop more of the embodied relational practice aspect of supporting people in their development. But the vision there is to really just support people in rediscovering and embodying their wholeness, because the world needs more human beings that are
Yes,
embodying their wholeness.
I agree. I agree. And I think we can collaborate to help you with whatever you want to do as a PTI
It's a lot for me
organization.
to work with you guys for quite some time. So
Thank you
yeah,
so much.
yeah,
Thank you.
thank you.
Have a great day. Bye bye.
You too.